I'm Horst Stipp. Thanks for hanging around. Obviously, I have a very difficult job here to entertain you between this awesome Google Glass presentation and the wine and cheese reception. But I'm going to try my best. I personally think that I have an interesting topic, media use. Actually, I looked at the attendee list. I think quite a number of you guys are in fact in the media business, right? Who is in a company that buys or sells advertising on television or online? Well, all right. So this is a great topic, right? And I think the reason it is such an interesting topic is because of all the changes in media use that we're experiencing. And obviously, I've been around a little bit longer than you guys. And so what's fascinating to me about this is there was actually a time when, let's say, the New York Times or publication like that would never ever report about media. Today it's like you see stories like this in the paper all the time. And we took a look at this starting a couple of years ago and took a look at, how do the media report on what's going on in the media? What's going on with the changes in media use? And we looked at all of these headlines and we saw a lot of exclamation marks and also a fair amount of conflicting information. And we thought we should really take a look at that and, what are the media saying? What are the reporters saying? And I'm talking about things like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Media Post, like the trade publications. So what are they reporting and what are the stories and how come there's a lot of contradiction, in what they report. So we took all of these headlines and came up with a number of stories so that we sort of saw frequently and asked ourselves the question, so do they really reflect the reality of media use or are they sort of myth? Okay? So here they are. I don't know if you can all read them in the back, but what I'd be really interested in to start off with is for you guys to tell me in your own personal behavior, which of these do you think describe what you do? And by the way, we have all of this in a white paper that's in the back there and will be handed out later. So you can relax and, Number one, television viewing is in decline, especially among young people. So you qualify as young people. Do you think you're watching less television on TV sets, and I mean traditional old-fashioned television, than you used to?
Yes.
Who would say yes? All right, that's about 2/3. All right. Now here's another statement. More people watch television on computers than on TV sets. So here's my question to you guys. When you think about all the TV shows you watch, do you watch them more often on a computer or more often on a, on a widescreen or so? Who watches more often on a computer than on a regular TV? That's about half and half. Okay, it's getting interesting. Time shifters don't watch TV commercials. So if you do watch on the TV and you do have a DVR, you always zap through the commercials. So I don't know how many people have a DVR and all of that. Well, who watches TV with a DVR? All right, that's also about half. And when you do, you always zap through the commercials, or since you're in the business, do you occasionally watch commercials? Huh? Honest now. All right. Who always zaps through the commercials? Pretty much so. Who says, well, I usually do, but then I often do check what's going on, and sometimes I do watch the commercials? Not so much, huh? All right. You guys are all too busy to watch that stuff, right? All right. Here's another statement. Cord cutting. And by that we mean canceling cable because you don't need a TV anymore, you watch online. So who lives in a home where they used to have cable or satellite and you don't have it anymore, you canceled it? Oh my God. Okay, cool. Social media is killing TV. Who would say that they spend more time on Facebook than watching television programs? That's the real minority, right? Okay, who thinks that YouTube is bigger than any other TV network? Who watches more or spends more time on YouTube than watching regular TV shows? Igor, are you the one? He's pleading guilty. Okay, who else? Just a couple more. All right. And finally, most of the time, when you do watch TV, you also have your smartphone or your tablet in your hand and are using it at the same time. Well, there we have a strong majority again. All right, so this is just great. I love this. But the one thing that I think is really interesting to me is that on a lot of these items, not everybody raised their hand on either side of the story. So the one thing I think we can already take away, even though some people might say, well, you know, this is a pretty homogeneous group. You know, they're like media business and Googlers and all sort of like, you know, 20-somethings. But they don't all act exactly the same way, right? And that's the point that I want to get back to. So this is what we want to talk about. I want to quickly set the agenda and talk about why we're even so interested in this issue and why we at the ARF are talking about that. Secondly, I will try to convince you, in case you need convincing, that media quality is a topic that is very important to the ARF and that Don has worked a lot on in the project that he's leading, that the issue of quality of the data on media use is like really important to consider in all of this. And then we got a couple of case studies where we want to talk about some of these items, but not in the context of how you use the media, but how the consumers in general use the media, right? So very quickly, setting the stage, and Don, I apologize. Obviously, this slide has too many words on it, and I knew this was going to happen. And I know you're going to give me a bad grade later on, but anyway, I will get better in the future. So we're talking about measures of exposure, right? So how much time do people spend with a medium? We're not talking about effectiveness of media, which is like a whole other big important topic. Why is this important? Well, that's how people buy and sell television, right? So there's these agreements on having a measure. It's called currency. And they're trading like, what is it, $70 billion on it. All the advertising online and on television is being negotiated on the basis of these data that indicate the opportunity of reaching X number of people with your advertising on this medium, on this channel. And the reason, as I said to the beginning, why it's so important to have really accurate data on that is because, you know, big money is at stake, and because this is changing all the time now. Like I said earlier, you know, when I was your age, it was like the only thing that happened was, like in a whole decade, was that, you know, CBS was number one, then NBC was number one, then ABC was number one, and, you know, and one show went to number one and then another. But in terms of general media use, amount of time, how people watch media, so little changed. But today it changes all the time. We know that. You just demonstrated that by you know, raising the hand on some of these very, very new behaviors. Because if we'd done this a year ago, and I would have said, are you spending a lot of time watching TV and using a tablet at the same time? You would have said, what's a tablet, right? Think about it. 2 years ago, it wasn't even there, right? So there's a lot of change going on. And then finally, as I said at the beginning, we really need to look at this because there seem to be a lot of different opinions and stories out there. So to start off with, we want to talk about media quality. The quality of research for media data, the importance of using quality data to get accurate information on something like this, which is so important for business, because we all know if you have misinformation, it can hurt your business, so it's really important to get this right. Well, do we get this right all the time? Well, we don't. One of the real big problems we have right now is that because media behavior is changing so quickly, the data on media behavior are not as good as they used to be. When people spend nearly all of their time watching television, like 20 years ago, on a TV set, there were Nielsen ratings, and they pretty much captured all the viewing. Today, let's stick with a broadcaster. If your TV show is available on TV, online, on smartphones, on tablets, what have you, your total TV audience is on all of these different media, and adding all of this up, measuring all of this is incredibly hard. So for example, when the tablets came first out, Apple had no interest in giving any data to anybody because they said, well, these are our customers, and why should we give you data? So all of these things take time, and the ARF had a meeting recently, an industry leader forum, where everybody agreed that the quality of the measurement, even though measurement is changing and they're trying to improve the measurement, it's really lagging behind the changes in the consumer. So the first little problem we have here is that cross-media measurement isn't really all that good yet. Secondly, there is this whole issue of sampling. As you know, there are some ways, under the headline of big data, where you get like a census and you just measure all the behavior. But for most measurements, such as measurement of TV, like Nielsen does it, we need a sample. Well, the problem with sampling is it's really not all that easy to get an accurate sample. And what we often find is that this is something that people sort of don't take very seriously, sort of overlook. And this is what happens. We have an example here from an experiment that was done in order to explore what is the role of sampling? Is this just something like research nerds are like really fascinated with that, but who cares? Or is it something that can really affect your data? So this is what they did. They did exactly the same study, asking about reading these newspapers. It was done in Canada and Toronto, where the mayor smokes crack. But these people did a very good job by asking exactly the same question over the telephone, and with 1, 2, 3, 4 different online sample that they bought from companies that do big, online studies. And look at the results they got. Nobody knows which one was true, right? But what we do know is all the results are different, significantly different. And it was not just for reading. You got the same thing when they asked about online. So is it 9%? Is it 22%? Who is right? The point I'm trying to make here is to demonstrate that if you're using a bad sample, you can really end up with really, really bad data. And again, it's an issue that often is not particularly taken seriously. All the time you can read reports about surveys, in papers or online stories, and wherever you hear about this kind of stuff. And if you dig a little deeper, you find that somebody asked 500 people online or what have you, and there's just no idea about whether this is really a representative sample or not. So this can really lead to bad data. Here's another issue, which in this area is just really important and kind of fascinating too. It's this whole thing about recall of time spent. And we don't have time for this now, but you can have fun with that for yourself, and on your way home, think about how much time you spent making phone calls, commuting, commuting in a week, watching TV in a week. We just don't think about it that way, and it's just very, very hard for people to accurately really remember all this information. So that's why, for example, in television, they spend all the companies spending millions and millions of dollars getting these Nielsen data, with a higher degree of accuracy, which are passive measures, electronic measures. And that's why companies like Google and Microsoft and Twitter and all of that, who have access to these so-called big live data, have this incredible advantage in being able to get information on their customers, on their consumers, of course, strictly guarding their privacy, which are not dependent on surveys and which are not dependent on people's recall and people's memory of what they do. Added to that is social desirability, which is that if you ask people, they don't always tell you exactly what they do. So when I was still at NBC, we often found that in surveys, people just vastly overstated their viewing of public radio and all of this, and of documentaries and what have you, and the rating showed you that that simply wasn't true. I have example on that too, because on each of these cases, being a researcher, of course I have to provide some documentation. This is from an academic study, and what's so interesting about this is that the study showed that the way people distort their media behavior, probably unintentionally, is not the same for every medium. So it's not like you said, oh, you know, they forget half of it, and so you just have to double it and then have an accurate number. So here's an example from a very clever study they did. And I'm keeping this cameraman really busy, right? Should I like stand still for a change? A really interesting stuff that they did and then used for a really big study is where, you know, obviously just in the daytime, they had people observing people using the media. They were sort of like shadowing people and looking what they really did. And then they asked people on in a phone survey, you know, how they had spent their time with the media. And as you see from the data, the distortion or the inaccuracies really vary tremendously from one medium to another. There's very little discrepancy on newspapers, but it's huge for television and for radio and all of these things. And of course, one of the things that makes it complicated is that some of this is background activity, right? And that people are using other things, and they don't remember that they were watching television because they were doing other things at the same time, and so on. So the bottom line here is beware of information about people's recall based on surveys. Of course, having said that, what did just happen here? Oh, it's just a summary. Having said that, I'm not knocking here surveys as a research tool in general, especially not if there's somebody in this room who works for a company that does this sort of thing. Let me stress, some companies have found really, really good ways around that. I know I have a friend here from ESPN. They're using a company that does a product where they measure media use through a survey type method. But the way they get around the problem is they ask a small sample every single day. So the recall really is for that day, and they have good ways of adjusting these data. So it can be done, and surveys are good for general use information, but it's very, very tricky to rely on surveys and respondent recall for, you know, complex information and precise information. And it's getting harder all the time the more media we use and the more different kind of media we use. Because if you use all kinds of different media and somebody asks, well, so you watch Breaking Bad, did you watch it on the TV, on the smartphone, on the tablet? And you're saying, well, what the hell, who cares, right? It was a good show, but I don't remember how I saw it, that particular episode, and so on. So that's why we like passive measurement. Here's another reason why we like passive measurement, and there's another problem with surveys that's getting worse because, again, the more media you have, the more media you want to ask about. The more media you ask about, the more people get freaked out that you want to talk to them on on phone or online for a half hour, and you want half an hour of their time for them to answer all of these questions. And it's a real problem because the cost of surveys, of course, goes up dramatically if you do different kind of surveys. If you pack everything in one survey, you save a lot of money. So guess what a lot of companies are doing, right? They're making the surveys longer and longer, response rates are going down. And what did the ARF's quality project find? Well, let me show you these data, which are really, really scary and fascinating. So here we're comparing surveys of 15 minutes length and 30 minutes length. And what do we find? Bad behaviors are tripling. So what is bad behaviors? Well, the survey respondents didn't actually do anything delinquent, but what they did was they did two or more of these things. Inconsistent response, which means early on they said, I don't do this. Later on they said, I do. They reported non-existing brands. So they put into the questionnaire on purpose, in a list of brands, have you used the following brands? Crest, Colgate, and then they put a brand in that sounded kind of really like it could be a toothpaste but didn't exist. And sure enough, they think, oh yeah, use that every day. And then finally, the phenomenon of straight lining, which Don, I think, demonstrated early on, when he said, oh, and then these respondents find out, I get points for my survey, and here's this list. I can just answer every question, check, 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 and I don't even have to read the damn question because I'm just going down the line. And so these kind of behaviors increase dramatically. By the way, especially among young men, so you've got to watch out for them. So again, my point here is there are really, really pitfalls in these kind of methods and real dangers if you rely on this information to make business decisions, or if you read about them in a reputable information source, and you don't look at the quality of the data, and you just don't know that there might be an error in it. Then issue number 5, question bias. Like Gwen was telling you, I worked for NBC for quite a while, so I have a little experience with that. And I can't tell you, once you know this stuff, it's incredibly easy to create a biased question that generates the kind of information that you want. And if you guys work in sales research, there's always a little temptation just to do the research a little bit. Now, you can't be blatant about it, right? So let me show you an example. Very innocent, right? Great question here. Do you watch more or less TV than you did a couple of years ago? More or less TV sounds very, very unbiased, right? So now you offer people choices. Check this, check this. In form A, we offered them more or less, right? Sounds very cool, right? Form B, more, about the same, or less. Look at the results. Now, if you want to demonstrate the point that people don't watch television anymore as much as they used to, well, you want to go with this version, don't you, right? Because if you use this version, only 20% will actually say yes, less. Most people say about the same. So again, in looking at data, it is so important to really carefully look at that. In the political area, look, it is fascinating how much manipulation is possible just by phrasing questions in certain kind of ways to get an answer that suggests that the majority of Americans want A or B or C or what have you. So again, warning, be skeptical, be careful, because you don't want to absorb bad information. So the summary here is, what I was trying to demonstrate to you is quality really matters. There's a lot of tendency right now in the business to say, I want things better, quicker, and cheaper. But you really can't have it all. There is a trade-off. And especially this point here, we often need information very, very quickly. It's not that easy to do really good work and really get great insights, accurate insights that quickly. So, as I said, passive measurement usually is better in this area. Surveys do have a place. They just have to be done really careful. And I think we just need to recognize that not all methods give you perfect answers. But that's not all, because there's this other issue. And that is the best study, and if you're a researcher, of course, you know that, the best study does not give you good insights if the findings aren't interpreted correctly. So even if the sample and the length and everything is perfect. And what we often find in reporting of the media, of media use, is this kind of problem. That people just treat every piece of research equally. They don't recognize which one is done with good quality and which is done with poor quality. And the other thing that I think we find is, and I think we have to admit that we probably all feel that way, that, the report about a change, something new, something different, is just kind of more interesting. And if you talk to people in the media, which I have in context with this report, they say, Well, Horst, you have to understand, we have a deadline, and we don't want people to fall asleep. We want to capture them with interesting information. We want to tell them something new and exciting. So if we see something that sounds really interesting, we jump on that. Yeah, I said, I understand. I said, the only problem is that very often those surprising findings are surprising because they're nonsense. Well, he didn't like that. But anyway, that's what I'm trying to convince you of today, which is that the one problem we see all the time is what I would call the illusion of precision. That we think we know something with great precision, and it really is just an estimate. My pet peeve is when you see forecasts, and I wouldn't be surprised if some company out there is right now making a forecast that in the year 2025, 57,342,157 Americans will own Google Glasses. And they figured that out with this kind of precision because they're geniuses. Or I may ask, they were able to do that because they actually have customers who believe in this nonsense and who don't stumble over the fact that, of course, nobody knows exactly how many people will own Google Glasses. As a matter of fact, we heard earlier, the rollout hasn't even been determined. But we read this all the time. Now, having said all of this is not a new issue at all. I can recommend to you, I think it's like $7, this book from 1954. It's so old-timey. It's very, very funny and amusing because of some of these examples in there. But interestingly, it makes exactly the same kind of points. In the 40s and 50s has examples exactly of the same nature. So they're not about Google Glasses, but they're about newspapers and television sets and old-fashioned stuff like that. So it's really fun to read, and it's just really amazing how these issues haven't changed at all. The second interpretation issue is a confusion about reach and time spent, and we're going to go through a couple of examples that focus on that. The currency of television, the so-called ratings, are basically a product of number of people reached and how much time they spent. But reporters who aren't trained in these media often get those two things confused. And we'll see lots of examples that illustrate that. And of course, I don't know if it's right to say we can't blame them, because I would kind of think that if you're a media reporter, you should try to understand these things. But the problem, as I said earlier, of course, is that different media are measured in different ways, and it's kind of often difficult to put these things together. But again, we need to be aware of that and remember that. Number 3, ownership does not mean regular use. Just because people have something does not mean that they always use it. And we very, very easily sort of jump to that conclusion, right? Now, these examples are a little bit old, and some of these numbers have changed, but an example would be the DVR. So 50% of American households have a DVR, or if you want, 50% actually don't, which is sort of amazing to some of us, including myself. But anyway, so we love our DVRs, but right now the number's a little higher. But still, about 90% of viewing is not DVR viewing. People have TVs, most people have the TV on all the time and watch it all the time and don't really record that much. HD TV, another example that I find fascinating, because it would never occur to me to watch something that's available in HD and not watch it on HD. But what the study found initially when people got the set, that a huge portion of programming was still watched in analog because people just loved their big TV and said, "Ooh, it looks so much better," even though it wasn't really actually HD. So the point is here, again, this is sort of something to keep in mind, that penetration, just because people have something, does not mean they use it all the time. Number 4, correlations are interpreted as causal connections. Well, that's of course is the basis of all stereotypes, and also the basis of a lot of stories about the media, where assumptions are being made, connections are being made, which haven't really been explored and often turn out to be inaccurate. And we'll have an example about that later. And that example, as I'm giving away here already, is cord cutting, which in nearly all reports being interpreted as people are canceling cable or satellite because they can now see most of their shows online, and therefore they don't need a TV anymore. And we'll show you some data that suggests that that probably is not the real reason, at least not in most cases. Finally, simplification. And that was the point I was trying to make earlier when you guys all raised your hand, and then I said, wasn't it interesting on a lot of these issues, even though this may look like a homogeneous group, there were a lot of different patterns. Not everybody raised their hand to all of these stories. So what I find very often is that lots of stories, lots of reports saying the consumer does this, consumers do this, they want this, they will do this, and all of that. But what's really going on, and I think we all kind of know that, is that the consumer market is very, very fragmented. And it's not just fragmented by gender and age and rural versus urban, south versus north, but it's also within these groups, it's segmented by sort of personal preferences. You probably have a friend or friends who are exactly your age and what have you, but on certain kind of things, they are exactly the opposite. So we can't just assume, and we shouldn't just assume, that because 10, 20, 30% of people have bought something new, then in a couple of years, everybody will own it, right? So my favorite image of all of that is this highway image, which I think sort of really is a nice reflection of what the trends in media use really are like today. There are some things that seem to be going in certain directions, but not everybody follows it. And it's not just in media. I mean, think about music, right? So you probably still all remember CDs, But now there are people, who are like really into music, and they have recovered vinyl. And I just read a report that now some people like cassettes. So it's like, right? It's crazy, right? So that's what I mean by all of these complexities and so on. And from a business point of view, what I think is so interesting about this is, once you really keep that in mind and think about that a lot, it really offers you business opportunities by understanding segments, by not assuming everybody will do the same thing, but identifying segments that will embrace your product, embrace your media content, embrace whatever you have to sell. And you can get to know that segment better and analyze it better. But if you start out by thinking, oh, well, people are all the same and stuff like that, you miss out on that. So my summary on that is that we need best practice in research quality and also in data interpretation. And sometimes, it's important to realize we don't really know exactly what's going on. And that is important too, because that is much, much better than having this illusion of precision about something and thinking we know something and build a business plan or business decision on the basis of data or basis of assumptions, I should say, that turn out really not to be accurate after all. So with that, I'm coming back to our media myth or reality. Now, we did this, sign of hands earlier, and I always asked, what do you do? Now that we talked a little bit about all these different kind of consumers and all of that, I think I alerted you to the fact that maybe not everybody in America is exactly using the media like you do, right? You're open to that suggestion? So let me ask you this this way. Is television, old-fashioned, old-timey television on a TV set, even though big flat-screen TV set, is that in decline? And probably especially among young people. America in general. Now we talked about the fact not everybody's the same, but if you did an average kind of image, would that be accurate? So who thinks that television on TV sets really is in decline and that it's significantly lower than it used to be today? And so who says it's in decline?
Young
All right. Let's say in general audiences. In general, okay. Okay, couple. Is it going up? Does that mean it's going up, or what do you guys think? Maybe about the same? All right. Well, then let's say among young people. What about young people? Defined as people like, 18 to 29. Is it going down among them? Okay, we got a couple more hands. Well, all right. So the fascinating story, I think, is that if you take the long-range perspective, 1995, Seinfeld was number one. Well, it's still on the air, right? Compared to that, television actually has gone up. And this, again, is Nielsen data on of TV viewing on TV sets. It's gone up. How is that even possible, right? Well, one reason probably is 50 channels, 500 channels. The choices have increased dramatically. Now, the increase isn't all that big, so the individual channels, excuse me, have much smaller audiences than they used to be, so there's much more fragmentation. But it has gone up. Now, having said that, if you look at the last couple of years, it stopped going up. And it's down 3 minutes. So if you want to be literal about it, yes, television has gone down by about 0.5%, but we don't know whether it's random fluctuation or whether it's a real change. However, among younger people, it actually is going down. Not all that much. And it is absolutely true that people in that age group, just like you just demonstrated earlier, are more likely than any other group to watch television shows on computers, and other devices, which of course makes a lot of sense, especially if you live in a small apartment, move a lot, and don't actually like to move around with 50-inch TVs and all kind of other crap. So, among older people, it's gone up a little bit. Again, reflecting probably the increases of choices, but the change is not all that big. So, if you read what's been written in the media, though, in the last 5 years about this topic, most stories seem to suggest a dramatic decline. There are a lot of stories about young people, being more likely to watch less television, so that's kind of accurate. So I would say mostly myth. Number two, more people watch TV on computers than on TV sets. I think there was a divided kind of voice here. America in general, average. Who would say it's accurate? Is it a myth? Who thinks that this is not accurate? More people watch TV on computers than TV sets. Yeah, not accurate. Okay. You guys are much more tentative with raising your hand than you were at the beginning. I think maybe I came on too strong with all my quality stuff. Anyway, of course, where does even the story come from? And the reason I put this in here is exactly for this reason, because this is just so interesting to me. There was a PricewaterhouseCoopers study. Now, Pricewaterhouse is like a very well-respected analysis company for financials and what have you, right? And it was then reported in broadcasting and cable. Again, a trade publication, widely respected. And they said, among all groups, more people are watching TV online than on TV sets. And sure enough, I'm getting emails from Germany and what have you, like, oh, what is this report about? What's going on in America? And is this going to happen to us too? And blah, blah, blah. And where does this all come from? Well, somebody did a survey, right? The reality, of course, is sort of like this. If you look at users, monthly reach, television, internet video, and this was still last year, television is about 50% bigger, but if you look at the amount of time spent, television and internet video, this is sort of relationship. So this is then if you look at the total amount of video usage, and again, these are data from Nielsen and ComScore. They sort of estimates and putting it together. So to my point earlier, there's it's not as 100% precise as I wish it would be, but it kind of gives you a little, gives us a little bit of a good indication. Let me put it that way. And it shows again what we were talking about. Among young people, it's a little bit more, right? There's a little bit more online use, but even among them, it seems like about 70% of television viewing and video consumption is on the TV set. So this is like total nonsense, right? But you know, I'm sure that if you ask journalists, trade journalists, and a lot of other people who are not as close to the business as you guys are, they would say, oh yeah, I believe that, you know? And it's just very, very dangerous to have these kind of wrong information in terms of business strategy, financial investments, but also if you think about predictions, because somebody could argue, well, you know, I think give it 10 years, you know, that's probably going to be true. Well, we could argue about that, right? And I think it's very difficult to make those kind of predictions. But if you start out with a wrong, inaccurate, you know, point of view or with inaccurate data, it's just really, really difficult to get any kind of meaningful predictions for the future. Now, here's a good one, because I talked about television and videos so much, but you know, there still is the strange thing, paper out there. And you know, rumors have it there are still people who get the New York Times you know, in a paper format, and there are magazines out there. And again, there are tons of stories telling us that teenagers and young people stopped reading newspapers and magazines. Now, this question, of course, is double-barreled, so we got to take it apart. So is it correct that newspaper reading among young people has dropped dramatically, has really dropped a lot? True or false? True? Yeah, paper newspapers. Yes, yes, paper newspapers. Yes, yes, and you're right, absolutely, it has dropped. And it's really, you know, if you're is anybody here in the print business? Oh, okay. Well, all the best. How about magazines? Are you in the magazine business?
Yeah, magazines as well.
Good for you. For you too? Oh, you're with the Times? Well, we all love the Times, right? Did you see the Times on Google Glasses? Was that cool? See that? Anyway, and the Times is making money online, which is a rare phenomenon. Anyway, I'm almost giving it away here, right? So what's the story about magazines? Do young people still read magazines, as in, you know, magazines on paper? All right. Now, that's a very interesting story, because if you look at news magazines, right, the claim that young people don't read them anymore is absolutely correct. But it's also correct for every other age group. So news magazines and young people, print news magazines, is a really, really bad story. But I got these data from a friend of mine at Condé Nast, who actually sort of alerted me to this point here, which is that by looking at niches and different things and really looking at segments, you can identify business opportunities. And the next two slides now are the business opportunities. Health magazines. Today, people 18 to 24 are more than twice as likely to read a health magazine than they did in the 90s. So on this topic, health, there was this great business opportunities that magazine publishers had taken advantage of. So while there was a general decline in reading a lot of types of magazines, in this area, they identified this great business opportunity. And there's another topic, celebrity magazines. So we can get in a whole thing about, you know, news down, celebrities up, oh my God. But this is a reality. And by the way, outdoors and some other categories, the same story. Today, young people, included and older demos too, but it's much more pronounced for young people, are more likely to read in paper than they did 20, 30 years ago. So you see, it's a really interesting to see, I think, how complex some of these trends are. And there's, on the one hand, a lot of misinformation. On the other hand, if you have the good information and you look for good information and really analyze the data well, you identify great business opportunities. No, that was print copies, and thank you for reminding me. I made the point earlier with television. When I said TV, I meant TV on TV sets. And this was print, paper stuff. But thank you for clarifying that. And by the way, we were just at a conference about tablet use of magazines, and of course that's increasing. But what we learned was very interesting. The very up-to-date research suggests that tablets are turning more into a video medium, and that the increase in magazine reading on tablets isn't really quite as strong as a lot of publishers had hoped for or thought it would. So it's increasing, but I think they also got to figure out how to really take advantage of the digital medium for that. Time shifters don't watch TV commercials. Did we do a raise of hands how many people actually have a DVR in the home right now? Lots of you, right? And again, I've seen tons of surveys that suggest that if you have a DVR, if you time shift, you don't look at commercials. You zap through the commercials. And a lot of people kind of confirmed that here. Interestingly, Nielsen actually measures that. So Nielsen actually has these data, and again, they're measured passively. So we're not asking you, if you time shift, do you look at commercials? Which I think a lot of people interpret that question actually as saying, if you time shift, do you zap through the commercial, or are you an idiot who still looks at the commercials even though you could zap through them? So most people, in fact, will tell you, oh, I always zap through commercials. And then on the next question, tell me some of your favorite commercials. And then they list like 20 commercials that they really love. And it doesn't really occur to them that there seems to be a disconnect. Well, the reality actually is, without now going through the data in great detail, is that when people time shift and they watch time shifted TV shows, almost half of them still have the commercials on and don't fast forward them. Now, if I was still at NBC, I would say, see, now they're not at NBC anymore. I can be very, very objective about this and say, well, look, it doesn't mean that they're actually really paying a lot of attention to it, because maybe they didn't fast forward because they were doing other things. Now, the research actually suggests that a lot of people sort of forget that they have recorded it and they just kind of watch as they usually do. But most importantly, this is another instance where survey data give you wrong information, where the passive information tell you a different story, and the story is sort of counterintuitive, and it's a story that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. And the bottom line, of course, is that if you look at the TV market, television commercials still seem to work very, very well, because people still absorb them, and so there's what is it, 70 billion, 60 billion dollar market. So again, we have passive data that really pretty well show you what's going on, and it's actually confirmed by TiVo data. And the advantage of TiVo data is they really are more granular. They have second by second data, and they have very interesting data that show you that people zap through them, but then they go back and actually watch commercials. And as you won't be surprised that people replay movie commercials a lot, and commercials with naked people. So cord cutting. For years, I think for 5-6 years now, we've read stories about people canceling cable in droves because they can now watch television shows online. So again, in general, to the best of your knowledge, and you don't have to raise your hand if you think, I don't really know for sure, but be honest. Do you think, or have you seen data that indicate to you that there's been a big drop in cable and satellite subscriptions because people are watching increasingly online, as a lot of you guys do? I remember early on, a lot of you raised the hand and saying, well, we don't have cable anymore, we cancel cable because we watch online now. So in general in America, is that what you did, or you don't think so? All right, but what about in general? What's going on? Is there a lot of cord cutting? Have you guys seen stories about cord cutting in the media? Yeah, right. It's reported a lot. Well, here's the story on that. What's fascinating about this is the reports usually come out at this point. cable subscriptions have always been very seasonal. A lot of people cancel cable in the summer because, you know, there isn't that much on and they're on vacation and they want to save the money because cable is expensive. Oh, let me just go back because there's one other interesting thing that's going on here. Because while they're talking about cord cutting, what seems to be going on here is that there isn't much growth anymore. It seems to be sort of much flatter than it used to be. And that's the real interesting story. It's not cable cord cutting, it's cord swapping. Because if you look at these numbers, in 2006, you know, telco like Vios and stuff didn't even exist and wasn't even measured. And that's what's going up. So there has been a drop, especially in cable, in favor of what the telcos are offering. And if you look at your mailbox, you know, their push always is, it's much cheaper. You know, you get it much cheaper from us. You can save a lot of money. And if you look at these data here, you find that there is a very, very strong correlation between income and ownership of cable. If you think about it, if you get a good package, like in New York, cable and broadband together is over $100. And for a lot of people, that really is a lot of money. And we sometimes kind of forget that. So what's really going on here is that a big driver of this whole issue is not that people are now all watching television online, because if you think about it, a lot of shows actually aren't available online, especially not premium sports, right? Which is why we have to pay, what, $6 a month for ESPN? So you can't get this stuff without cable or satellite, right? So the real interesting story here is, again, bad data interpretation. Surveys and self-reports, including surveys where people were asked, have you been thinking about cutting the cord? Were interpreted as saying, you know, oh, there's this big rush to abandoning cable and so on. Now, the very latest numbers, for example, do show a further decline in cable subscription. But again, it is not, the internet does seem to play a role, but not the major role. Apparently, the major role in the decline right now was the fact that people couldn't get CBS of all networks. CBS was the one that caused like 200,000 people to cancel their Time Warner subscription and probably switch to something else. So again, I would say mostly a myth. Social media is killing TV. That was the headline of a story. So the assumption is that most people spend more time on Facebook than watching TV. I think you guys were pretty split on that. America in general, more time on TV, more time on Facebook. What do you think? More time on Facebook than on TV. Who says yes? Just a couple of Okay, so the reality is, and again, the data aren't totally up to date, and I think we can assume that Facebook is probably a little bit higher. If you just look at monthly usage, television is clearly ahead. And you know, I talked to somebody in my office who said, oh yeah, Well, I said, one thing you have to remember, about 97% of Americans own a TV, but less than 80% have a computer. So right there, you have a big chunk of people who don't even own a computer, right? But if you look at the average minute audience, and again, this is because of the time spent, and if that doesn't make sense to you, just think about it. One TV show, even if you're there through the commercials, is 50 minutes. 50 minutes, and that's just one single show. 50 minutes on Facebook is a long, long time. So again, you have here this phenomenon where data being misinterpreted, but I think there's one other little thing going on here. And that is that a lot of people, a lot of writers, it's just hard for them to fathom that one medium, Facebook, is coming out of nowhere and is just so huge. How is it possible then that another medium doesn't go down, right? And I think there's a lot of
a lot of people assume that if one goes up, the other one has to go down. Sometimes that happens a little bit, but most of the time it actually doesn't. Media use, the amount of time that people spend on media has increased dramatically. And of course, you know, when you look at the data, you find that a lot of people who like television, for example, they love Facebook. They Twitter about TV shows all the time. So it's sort of like they're using all the media. And the other thing I think you find is that there's a lot of simultaneous media use, which allows people to just cram all these media into the same thing. YouTube is bigger than any other network. Well, how much time do we have left? Gwen, am I running?
2 minutes.
Oh, well, I don't have time to raise hands, but no. The report that we saw in, I don't know, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. So what was that based on? Well, look at that, YouTube, 150 million users, and look at the ratings for these television networks. They're just puny, right? Well, you know the trick by now, right? So if you look at the reach and compare it with the average minute, you know, you're in deep trouble. If you look at the actual reach, ignoring time spent, YouTube really is up there. It's a tiny easy. So YouTube really comes in very, very strongly. If you look at average minute audience, YouTube is like a, oh look at that, right? The Nickelodeon cartoon. So YouTube comes in very well and is growing. So look, it's an incredible success story, but it's still, I think, important that we get the facts right. And so I think we have to say, you know, this is a book. And then finally, most of the time when people watch TV, they're also using their smartphone, tablet, or laptop. Okay. So instead of asking you to raise hands, and if you can count by now, every item that we talked about was either a total myth or mostly a myth. So just to mix things up, at the very end, I put something, and the answer is a little different. The answer is, it's changing so fast, and it's still developing so much, and the data are so bad, we don't really know for sure. And I think that's a really interesting story too in the context here, is because again, I would suggest that it's really important to recognize that on some of these things, we just don't really know that well. And that the people who are buying tablets right now may be different users than the ones that are the early adopters. So it's really important to research that. And if you're researching in this room, you know, I think we should all celebrate our job security, because the more issues like that they are, the more do they need us. So I would say it's changing fast and we need good data. And then in my last 30 seconds here, where does this all go? Well, one thing you could say, and I'm going to be my own critic right now, say, well, you know, Horst, a lot of the stuff that you showed us, those claims that were made 2, 3 years ago, things are going in that direction, aren't they? And I say, you're absolutely right. They are going in that direction. There has been more of a decline of, there has been more of a growth of online TV. And a little bit more people canceling cable subscriptions than there was several years ago. But I still would argue that in order to make accurate predictions about the future, which is just so hard given the current state of technology disruption and fragmentation of audience, that there's nothing more important than starting out with a foundation of accurate data and accurate information. So my last slide here says, does anybody have any questions? But my question to Gwen is there wine getting old or cheese getting dry?